So now let's look at Nala's entry into the market. You entered a space that was already dominated by all these established remittance companies, the likes of Western Union, MoneyGram and Remitly, what have you. What gave you that competitive edge or that confidence that Nala would thrive within this market?
Do you know what? Everybody told us it would fail. I have investor emails, I have my friends' messages like, hey, you'll never be able to compete with Western Union, you'll never be able to compete with TransferWise, you'll never compete with Remitly, you'll never compete with MoneyGram. And, at that point, we've got to be a little bit delusional. So I was like, do you know what, at least let's try our best. And, it was tough. I was going to East London and Dagenham, Barking and Ilford. And if I open my phone here and I show you, if I type in my phone here, user, USER, this is our first 1,000 customers.
Ooh.
They have my own phone number.
Okay.
And, the reason why is because I would stop people coming outside of the church and like, hey, how do you send money to Kenya? Do you want to try this app? I saw people coming out of the mosque on Friday, hey, how do you send money to Uganda? You want to try this app? And that's how we started getting our first customers. And so there's a lot of work that people don't see behind the scenes of I'm sitting in Tanzania. I fly to London. I don't have a place to stay in London. I'm out there on a tourist visa. I'm staying on a friend's couch. I'm going to East London and sitting outside of a church and a mosque every Sunday, every Friday, stopping people, asking them how to send money home just to get customers, to get to my first 1,000 customers. So when we started growing and seeing that behavior of users coming back and wanting to use the product, then I was like, okay, I think we have something here that we can try to build up. As that started to pick up, yes, we have huge competition. Remitly is a publicly listed company traded on in the US. Wise is a publicly listed company traded in the UK. These are multi-billion-dollar businesses we're competing with. We don't have the same budgets. The way I look at it is like football. It's like we're that team that just got into the championship, not even the Premier League.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were in League 7. Now we just qualified. We got to championship. How do we win the championship? How do we get to the Premier League? How do we beat the Manchester Uniteds, Chelsea's, Arsenal, Man Cities, who are the TransferWises, Remitleys, and so on? Because we can't afford the same players that they can. They're a public listed company. They make $1 billion in revenue. I don't make $1 billion in revenue. And so they can afford to hire the best talent. So I have to I hone or build my own talent, but I'm trying to compete with people in a whole different league. And so I think that's kind of how I look at the industry. Obviously, we have so much work to do. That's why I said we're still babies as a business, because the opportunity for us to grow, because the market's growing, it's massive.
Okay, I do believe you can probably beat Manchester United, but now let's talk about the tech talent gap.
Yeah.
So Nala has a diverse group of experts who work for you. Some are African, European, and some based in the US. There is a visible tech talent gap, especially for tech companies and financial services. How much of a challenge is that for you as a business, and how do you see Africa tackling us having enough experts to work for our companies?
I think it's a big problem in Africa, and it's a huge opportunity. So let me give you some examples. If you look at regions across Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, the life principle, right? You're only as good as the 5 people you spend the most time with.
True.
And you're an average of them as well. And so if you think about it, you can't blame people for this. You can't blame people for not being exposed. That you can't do. But if I grew up in Mwanza, then I moved to Dar when I was 35. Then I started coding when I was 37. And the people I'm hanging out with are also people who maybe moved from Mwanza and start coding when they're 35 or 36. I'm only going to be an average of those people around me. And so whether I go to tech events or meetups in Dar, my quality and rate of learning is going to be very different unless I expose myself on a global scale with the internet, which I think the internet is the most amazing thing, where you can connect with people in Serbia, in Ukraine, in any country around the world, Poland, wherever, in the UK, in the US, and work together on collaborative projects, because then your quality of engineering starts increasing. Because hey, have you tried this new tool? You see what GitHub just released for me to be able to play and ship this. Have you played with Cursor so you can ship a bunch of stuff without having to rewrite everything? So when the averages start to increase, the quality of talent increases massively. And so the growth in the region is huge. Yeah. And this is what I was saying earlier. I think Tanzania should give any senior software engineer almost a free 2-year visa to work in Tanzania. Because they will start going to tech hubs and tech meetups, and therefore the quality of people around them,
volunteer or lecture at the university for free, the quality of engineering and like collaboration is going to increase massively and actually benefit Tanzania long term.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to costs.
Yeah.
Today, because the talent of that level of senior high quality engineers is rare in Tanzania, and every tech founder knows this, and every tech CEO who's building in Africa knows this,
Yeah.
those same people are paid premiums. When I say premiums, they're paid higher in Tanzania than they're paid in Germany for the same role.
True.
So as your founder, you have to ask yourself, okay, what makes the most economic sense as a business? Should you hire that engineer for the same role in Germany at half the price, or you hire them in Tanzania? Mm-hmm. Some of my engineers in Germany or a few places are cheaper than some of my engineers in Kenya.
Okay.
And so, it starts to become this gap because the talent quality is rare.
Yeah.
And so when companies are competing for them, they start paying premiums for them and they just outbid each other. Mm-hmm. And so whereas you go to Germany where people have been building apps for 15 years, the iPhone 2007, when the iPhone came out for the App Store, right? So you have people for, nearly 20 years who've been building apps. And you have somebody in Dar es Salaam who's only been building apps for 3 years. Like the average, going back to the principle, is going to be very different. And again, it's not their fault. But it's like, how do you increase the quality of the average talent for people, especially with how you're surrounding yourself with? And I think this is an opportunity where governments can help. And I'm very pro digital nomad visa that we should do immediately in Tanzania and Zanzibar, enabling people to come, especially tech talent, because I think it will stimulate a lot of learning across the market.
Yeah, and what is your view when it comes to the tech migration? Because you have mentioned the fact that we do, due to the limited number of not just the talent, but also even the companies that where these talents can be utilized, we are seeing a lot of African experts opting to work abroad, which now, again, it propagates this entire narrative that we do not have enough experts. What is the view when it comes to the tech migration?
If people want to leave for opportunities abroad, it's not just the tech industry, it's like the healthcare industry too, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Kenya and Uganda or Zimbabwe, I think have the most nurses from Africa who work in the UK who are from Zimbabwe. Then it's Nigeria.
Yeah.
And for Asia, it's Philippines, it's number one, right? Most number of nurses who live in the UK from Philippines. Same with the US. It's Filipino migrants. So I think, look, talent is everywhere, opportunity isn't. And if people are getting those opportunities to go abroad, go do it, because Filipinos still send money home.
Yeah.
So if they go abroad and they're still contributing, like somebody's lived abroad for 5 years, now they're building an Airbnb in Mikocheni and they're stimulating local economy and they're hiring people and so on, I think it's a good thing. The challenge, as you rightly mentioned, is does it lead to a brain drain, right? Does it lead to our best people leaving?
Yeah.
And I think there's pros and cons for both sides that make it difficult to balance out.
Okay, now looking at the Tanzanian space, I want you to tell us what is your view about the regulatory framework when it comes to attracting startups being established here, but also startup investment. Do you think we have a conducive regulatory framework that enables such a prospect?
There's two things I want to address on this one. Number one is, I remember when all those articles were coming out about, Nala is not headquartered in Tanzania, blah, blah, blah. I saw politicians saying, whether it's at Parliament or other videos, I talked to Benjamin and, I know why he moved to Kenya, blah, blah, blah. Or they were tweeting things like that. No. And I showed you this on my phone. I have not a single text message from any of those people, not a single phone call from any of those people, not a single email from any of those people. And it's frustrating to get boxed into this is why. And we know that this is the reason why we can create a better conducive environment and so on, which is practically incorrect and a little bit disrespectful, because people were just using that as a way, especially politicians, unfortunately, using it as a way to, if they really cared about making it a better conducive environment and really spoke to me as Benji, then they would know what I would have had to say versus claiming that they did, which is factually incorrect. So please don't do that.
Okay.
So the second piece, I think, is more around, what needs to change. Look, I think the central bank today of Tanzania is maybe 5 to 10 times better than it was even 5 years ago. Okay. And I think people there, like Madam Lucy in the National Payment System, have been very proactive in their thinking around how to support fintech companies and so on, which is really good. And I think I wish that was there at the same level like 6-7 years ago when I was starting out.
Okay.
And this is why I always say, like, it takes somebody to push the narrative and change for other people to have it easier for them.
True.
And, for me, yes, I did have some challenges in Tanzania, but it's made it way easier. Like, I see some of my friends applying for licenses and getting them within a shorter time, like maybe 1/3 the time it took me to get them. And I'm like, wow. So it does make me happy that, even our story as Nala has helped change some of the way that the country looks at tech companies. Now, conducive environment, I think there's many things that do need to change. Transfer pricing around the value of shares or the value of what stocks should be worth in tech is just somebody from the Revenue Authority saying, I'm like, okay, how are you valuing the businesses and so on? And I think there's some thinking that needs to go into that. I do think there needs to be tax benefits to tech startups. So even like they should go a bunch of years without having to pay for a certain type of tax until they hit maybe a certain level of revenue. So it's whatever comes first. I think we should look at other enabling policies, whether it's sandboxes. We've been talking about sandboxes for many years. I think a lot of them are irrelevant even till today, and frankly don't exist in a way. I think banks in Tanzania are frankly a joke with their innovation centers because some of them want to do innovation centers to sound cool, but how have they actually supported tech companies? You should take pride when the tech company is succeeding because of you. True. Not just to say like we have this innovation center, we're the best at innovation, right? And I think there's a lot of noise around building innovation versus take that same money you did to do that huge press release and that campaign around Innovation Center and build proper APIs and enable a tech ecosystem to be built with you. Call founders in. If you really want to build an innovation center, call founders, call tech builders in, call them in every week. What are the top 3 things you want from this bank? What are the top 3 things we should build for you? And the banks that do that will do really well. And unfortunately, most banks look at it today as a PR stunt to look cool or like feel like the innovative bank, but actually solving problems with fintech companies. The ones that will pay attention to solving problems with fintech companies will do really well in the next 10 years.
Okay. So we have seen a lot of hackathons that to try to come up with solutions to different challenges, especially within the banking industry. And these banks seem to be a little bit adaptive to the technology. So again, I think they've heard your message. Now, beyond the regulations in relation to investing, you talked a bit about the language barrier, which that brings us to the topic of the education. So Tanzania prides itself in being a Swahili-speaking country, which Swahili is growing internationally, but we also understand that English is it's more of a global language. I want you to share your views about the relevance of English when it comes to tech and just business in general, and what else needs to be implemented within our curriculum to ensure that moving forward we have that expertise when it comes to technologies, for example, issues to do with coding and beyond that. What's your view about the education?
Yeah, so I think, I'm a proud Tanzanian. I carry my flag everywhere I go. I talk my country everywhere, and maybe to the point it's too much. And I think there's many challenges I see with this. So one around English needs to be standardized. It needs to be the default. If we want to compete at a global level and a global scale, we need to standardize English from a young age for people. I think we should still teach people Swahili and people should still speak Swahili, but you see in Kenya, right? I'm not saying we should go to the Kenyan Swahili, which I hope we never get to in terms of quality. But, I do think if we want to succeed for global trade, we need to normalize English and English conversations, English behaviors across our curriculums. Secondly, you mentioned with technology. If I was the Ministry of Education, I would even push for as one of the mandatory subjects. So everybody has to study mandatory subjects, which maybe they don't like. Some you might not like geography, you might not like English literature, you might not like whatever you have to study is mandatory from kindergarten to 10th grade. Or I would actually make software engineering mandatory. Okay. Kindergarten to 10th grade or kindergarten to 6th grade. And if the kid likes it and wants to continue with it, they can continue with it. Because if you look at countries like Estonia and regions like that where you have such a large tech prevalence, even in government, you have e-government that's probably the highest level in the world, which is Estonia. You notice that amount of people who study software engineering from a young age is higher probably than most of the regions that you have. And I think if we really want to compete long term, we have a huge opportunity because we have such a youthful population in Tanzania, and it's a growing population. How do we enable the youth to generate way more money than our neighboring countries? And I think there is an opportunity for us to do something there. And so I would almost mandate it and make it required. I was also going to say something that's really important with this one. It's not about just making it required.
Yeah.
I think it's about making it an issue of national pride.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. I meet a lot of young people all the time. I speak in events at the university. There's 1,000 young people there. I ask, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or like, what do you want to do later? The kids will tell me, oh, I want to be like diamond platinums, or I want to be like, so on, which isn't a bad thing. Or I want to be, it's always like a music artist or a politician.
Yeah.
And you must ask yourself why. And why do all the young people want to be either a music artist or politician? Because
for them, they see it as a view of success.
Yeah.
Because it's an issue of national pride. Now, why is it an issue of national pride? Because also the government prioritizes it. When it's election season, who gets called? The music artist. When it's right for election season, who gets called? The music artist for like a random award ceremony of like, okay, we're gonna pongeza these other people, blah, blah, blah. When do we get to the stage of saying, do you know what? When are we putting an establishment of like, for tech companies or tech founders, this is what we want to do because we want to make it a source of national pride. Now look at India. India today, you have kids that do math competitions, okay? And it's a source of national pride where you have generations of kids wanting to win that 10-year-old math competition.
No.
And so all of a sudden you have a whole generation of young people who prioritize studying math. And studying and trying to be really good at math. And what does that do for the country in the long term? When you have a bunch of smart kids, you make smarter decisions.
True.
And therefore local economies can grow. And so if you think about it this way, do we even have a math competition in Tanzania where the winner gets called to the State House? When somebody gets number one at NECTA, are they getting called to the State House, or are they just saying a newspaper on the Citizen saying, congrats to these 5 people?
True.
How do we start making that, whether it's education, whether it's things like this, a source of
national pride where you build generations of people caring about that versus just caring to be in politics, which isn't a bad thing, as I said.
Yeah.
But today it almost feels like there's 2 extremes.
True.
And this middle ground of, if you think about it, put yourself in my shoes. So I meet young kids and like, oh, Benji, I want to be like you. I wish they never said that, because I don't want to be like me. I want to be like, way better than what I am today. And I want to be way bigger. And I get it. For some of them, it's like, okay, cool. I want to build the next Nala. Cool. My hope is that they build a bigger Nala.
Yeah.
But if that young kid who's like 15 years old has nobody to look up to,
True.
like, who are they going to be like, okay, you know what? I want to be like this person one day. And there's many people in Tanzania. Like, for example, Edwin Bruno of Smart Africa Group, I think, we need to see how we can highlight him and like how he started his journey and like built Smart Africa Group, or even when it was just Smart Codes and like the agency and how they grew that, and highlighting people like him and his story more, whether it's Godfrey Magila from Magila Tech.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people like that, or Ian Usiri from Ramani, the Usiri brothers, like they're the second Tanzanian company to ever get into Y Combinator, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, how do we, this is a huge deal. Y Combinator has a 1% acceptance rate. It's harder to get into Y Combinator than it is to get into Harvard. Like, it's very impressive.
But nobody even knows what that is. And I think
when we can start, especially if that's an industry we care about honing, I do think that it needs to be a lot of change from a level where it is those things get recognized more publicly versus just, whatever.
Okay, so Benji, we could go on and on and on, but this conversation will never end. So we'll end on this note with just one final question. Where do you see Nala in the next 5 years? You are building for the next billion. Where do you see the company in the next 5 years and beyond?
As I think about this, we have so much work to do, and I think, the dream obviously would be to take this company public in the New York Stock Exchange. But it's a lot of work to get there. Like, are you doing $100 million in revenue? Are you doing $1 billion in revenue? Like, these are the things that you have to get to, and like getting to that level requires a ton of work. And so our work's not done. We're 1% where we need to be, and so across many countries. So today we're expanding. We're going to be in 18 new countries this year, and that requires a lot of work. And so we as a company and as a team, there's a lot that's ahead of us for us to be able to deliver, and some big shoes for us to fill. And so I want us on the consumer side to be the number one platform that any migrant, when they travel to a new country, is using for global cross-border payments. And I want Rafiq here, our cross-border infrastructure business, to be the number one platform for cross-border trade to emerging markets. Now, those are two very ambitious goals. Yeah. We've got a lot of work ahead for us. And, I think if we look at that, we need a lot of drivers and not passengers to make that happen.
Well, Benji, we'll end on that note.
Thank you.
You were with me, Mpoki Thompson, for the Citizen Exclusive. We were with the founder and CEO of Nala, Benjamin Fernandes. That's a wrap for today's episode. Until next time, bye-bye.